Hey guys, I hope that you are doing well. Coming to you today to talk about the student experiment, so IA2. This task involves you modifying an experiment, that's the duckweed one, in order to address your own related research question. So you can modify an experiment by refining, extending, or redirecting. So let's look at what that may look like for you. You would recognize this infographic where it talks about, well, to modify means to change the form or qualities of, just small changes. You can do this by refining. So without changing the independent or dependent variables, you may increase the sample size or use more precise equipment. You may also extend the experiment, which means to increase the scope or meaning of. So the independent variable for us was the water type. You may change the range of water types. You could also collect additional dependent variables. That's what you measure. So instead of just counting the number of fronds, you could also look at the biomass. You could look at the length or the height of the root. You could also redirect the experiment by changing the course of entirely. So instead of changing water type, you may choose to change the pH or the temperature or the light availability and see what effect that has on population growth, in this case, duckweed, or whatever root it is that you choose. So this task, it's a scientific report and it's 1,500 to 2,000 words. This is the format. It starts with a research question, has a rationale. It acknowledges the original experiment and then justifies the changes that you made to the method. Talks about the safety considerations, and that's part A. That's what this video will focus on. Part B then involves collecting data, analyzing the data, looking for trends, patterns, relationships. Once you've found them, saying why those may have occurred. Why was there a relationship between this and that, or a trend in this data here? Then evaluation of the methodology and suggestions of improvements. That's part B. Then there's a bibliography. So let's look at part A in this video. We'll talk about each of these 4 sections now. This is taken from the ISMG, so this is how I'm going to grade you on part A. It's important that you become familiar with the ISMG and also just read the online exemplars, which I will email to you. So to get top marks, you need to have a considered rationale for the experiment. You need to not just say what changes you made, but justify that. Say why you made those changes. Do you have a specific and relevant research question? Do your changes enable for the collection of sufficient, plentiful, relevant data? And have you considered the risks and ethical or environmental issues? So before you come up with your own research question, think how can you modify it by coming up with a mind map, something like this, where you talk about how you may refine the questions that you could come up with, and even think about how you could collect data and how you may analyze and represent it. So our research question for our experiment was this: is there a difference in the total duckweed population after 2 weeks growing in pond water compared to other growing mediums of varying nutrient availability? So every good research question has the variables identifiable. So a dependent variable, what are we measuring? Well, we're looking at the duckweed population. The independent variable, what are we changing? That's the water type. We can modify this experiment by thinking about how can we refine it, extend it, redirect it. Just want to zoom out for a sec though and talk about why we're doing this whole experiment. Well, the topic is we're going to be looking at population growth and how different factors limit population growth. So that will be the content for this coming term. So to investigate that, think, all right, how could I refine the experiment? We talked about this. You could increase sample size or change the equipment. It could be extended by changing the range of water samples and collecting more than just the total population. You may measure biomass and height of the root. It can also be redirected by, instead of changing water type, changing the pH of the water or light availability or temperature. So these things you can all do at home. So the research question, it needs to be specific. Just as we mentioned then, identify those two different variables. And it's going to be connected to your rationale. So the rationale is about 200 to 400 words. And this is a template that you do not have to strictly use. However, I'll give it to you to help you anyway. So if it's 3 paragraphs, the first paragraph just introduces the topics of this study and the relevancy they have to the real world. So what are our topics? Well, we're using duckweed and we're investigating population growth. So introduce those. Paragraph 2, go into more information on the different types of weed. How do they grow? Talk about photosynthesis. Talk about the environmental conditions they need. And also, what is population growth? What are those limiting factors? That could be paragraph 2. Look at other literature, other studies that are measuring these things. All the while, you are developing and refining your research question. Paragraph 3, you've come to your research question by now, and you're saying this is the other literature and this is how it relates to the variables of this study. Finishing with your research question, which is the line, consequently, this led to the research question, ... So, big picture, the rationale is to show the development of the research question. The original experiment. So acknowledge where that original experiment came from. In your case, it came from me. I actually got it from another lady who got it from this textbook, The Web of Life, 1997, a biology text. So you can say, this experiment was adapted from the one conducted in class, which was originally taken from the Web of Life textbook, where it looked at growing duckweed in various solutions. So it just says, after that, a short description of what the practical used, the experiment used ... and measured ... So then, modifications to the methodology. I'll give you another template here that you can run with to help you. You do not have to strictly adhere to it though. So paragraph 1, this section justifies the changes that you made by looking at 3 things: sufficiency, reliability, and validity. So, sufficiency. If you increase the number of samples that you collected, then that was to improve the sufficiency, the amount of data that you're collecting. So say that here. To ensure that sufficient data was collected, the number of samples was increased from this to this. Reliability. If you change the materials or the timing, maybe you increase the length from what ended up being for us 1 week, then say that the reliability of the data collected was improved by ... You may not do all 3 of these, hopefully definitely 1 or 2, but also the validity is another aspect that you can think of. So if the validity was improved by narrowing different factors involved in this experiment, then state that here. Lastly, you can make a final statement on how all other variables were controlled as per the original experiment. So this template is what I've taken off the QCAA exemplar. So I do encourage you to really read those and follow this. So the next paragraph you can talk about whether you refined, extended, or redirected, or did multiple ones of those. So you can use the initial line. The original experiment was refined by, then just use dot points and say what they were. Extended by, dot points again, redirected by, use dot points there too. Safety and ethical considerations. So with any experiment, there's always a risk involved, whether that's to self or whether it's to the environment. So here, you use dot points just to bring up all those things that you did to keep it safe, whether that was adhering to safety considerations outlined in the original experiment. I created and submitted a risk assessment for that, so you can use that line there. And whether it was things like just wearing protective gear, washing hands before and after use, etc. And lastly, some final tips for you guys. So this is a scientific report, right? And that's different to any other subject in the way of it's not like poetic. It's not English writing where you use figurative language. We use scientific language, and the number one thing that you can do to improve your scientific writing is to read more scientific literature, read journal articles. Also, use precise language. Keep sentences simple and clear. Avoid run-on sentences. And when referring to the work of others, you can use the words claimed, suggested, showed, demonstrated. For every word you write, every sentence you write, think, is there a more scientific, concise, or precise way of saying that? So instead of saying got bigger, it's increased. Instead of saying got, it's obtained. Instead of saying do, it's conduct or carry out. So where to from here? I'd like you guys to email me with your mind map, that picture that we looked at earlier, showing the considerations of modifications that you have come up with already. As well as that, your research question. And it doesn't have to be your final question, just what you have now. As well as your materials list, and when you were planning to conduct this experiment. Make advantage of this holiday period to get started on this experiment. If you can do it at home, then do it at home, because that gives you all next term to really focus on the writing of this. So email me within the week of watching this. That would be great. And that is all I have for you guys today. So keep the lines of communication open and let me know if there's anything else that I can help you with. Otherwise, God bless, and I'll see you guys soon.